Hello and welcome to this special edition of the IABC International Podcast. My name's Dan Gold, and on this episode we are speaking to someone who is also a podcaster and an IABC chapter president. Austin Staton, president of IABC Houston, is with us today, and he does host the rather excellent Business Communicators podcast. Austin, thank you for joining me.
Well, thank you so much for the kind words, Dan. It's a pleasure to be on the podcast and to be chatting with you during this time.
It's a difficult time. As you can see, if you're watching the video edition of this, I'm in my daughter's bedroom, and there are elements of Frozen and Disney DreamWorks Trolls and all sorts. Your background seems to be a little bit more organized than mine.
Appearances can be deceiving. That's why we just have the limited background right here and not the full 360 view. So,
firstly, before we start, I'd like to congratulate you on being the president of the International Chapter of the Year. What an achievement.
Well, thank you so much for that. It was definitely an honor for our chapter just to see the hard work that was put in for the past year. And I think, honestly, a lot of it goes into what we've learned from other chapters throughout the country. The San Francisco, basically all of the Canadian chapters, just taking the best practices and seeing what we can do to offer values for our members. And it's pretty cool to be recognized as a chapter.
And your chapter, one of the things, or a couple of the things that I really like is how you've invested time in going beyond the written word. And if anyone knows me from my IABC world, you will know that I am everything about going beyond the written word. The written word is essential, it's critical, it's crucial to what we do. But there are other delivery formats and platforms that we can use to reach different audiences. Before we get on to the reason why we're here today, what was the motivation for launching your podcast, which, by the way, I will provide a link in our description of this episode?
Yeah, so I appreciate that. So I've actually had experience in podcasting before launching the Business Communicators podcast. Back in 2015, believe it or not, when Donald Trump announced that he was running for president, I had a phone call with a friend of mine, and we were discussing that, we thought it was a publicity stunt at the time. And immediately after, we turned to our other favorite subject, which is sports. And I thought it was a really seamless transition. And I thought that night that I think other people would enjoy hearing what we had to say. So we ended up doing research for about a month, launched a podcast. It was terrible in terms of our first episode. Just like, we had no idea what we were doing. The quality was not that great. Spent entirely too much time trying to edit. But at the end of the day, it was a lot of fun to do. And we ended up having a strong and loyal audience. I think at one point we hit 30 to 40,000 listeners per week on each episode. So it was quite fun. And for IABC, I knew that not everyone at our chapter, specifically in Houston, because we are such a large spread out community, not everyone could attend our in-person events. And so I thought that if we could bring content that was valuable for the communications field to the people to listen to on their daily commutes, if they're working out, then perhaps it could help them find value in being a part of the IABC community. And our main focus is not necessarily tips and tricks for Houston communicators, but we try to make everything that we discuss on the podcast more applicable to a larger audience.
I really admire that. You're not geographically limiting yourself to just being a resource for your community. You're looking at the wider professional communicator world, which is fantastic. And I'm a very big advocate. I look at all the chapters. I see what webinars and meetings they've got coming up. Have they got a podcast? Have they got a presentation that they're sharing? These are all great resources from around the IABC world. I noticed when I was looking through IABC Houston's feed that you put a webinar together, the title of which, and apologies, I'll read it over here, Crisis Management and COVID-19. We're going to link to that episode as a part of this podcast episode. That discussion that you had, who did you bring in and why did you choose those voices to lend their expertise to this discussion?
Sure. If you don't mind, I'd also like to give a little bit of context, kind of how we initially started responding to COVID-19. For our March luncheon, which was scheduled for March 26th, we were going to bring in the entertainment reporter from CNN. Her name is Lisa France, and she was scheduled to fly down. In late February, we were actually notified that Warner Media and CNN had issued a travel ban for all domestic travel. So Lisa was unable to attend our luncheon. So we started looking at different alternatives. Okay, what speakers do we have that are in our hopper that we could maybe move up to March 26th? Then we started to realize that COVID-19 was in Houston. There had been community spread, and we discussed as a board that we needed to start looking at alternative options. And so we made the decision, I believe it was March 13th as a chapter. We actually did this through our WhatsApp group to go ahead and suspend all in-person meetings until May 15th. We issued a statement to our entire chapter, I believe on March 16th, kind of outlining that. And we told them that we were exploring other options for online meetings. And we knew that we hadn't used webinars before as a chapter, but we knew that we had enough tech savvy to be able to put something together. And we have strong connections that we've built over the last few years to be able to bring in a solid panel that people would actually want to tune in and listen to their expertise. So for our panel discussion, we had former Harris County Judge Ed Emmett. He was basically, the way that I would describe it for those that aren't in the Houston area, a judge is not what you typically think it would be. It's basically the governor of a county or a region. And so Judge Emmett had years of experience with responding to multiple hurricanes here in Houston, Hurricane Harvey back in 2017, and his leadership is just admirable. So we definitely knew that we wanted him on the webinar, and he graciously appeared to join. And he actually joined our test webinar, which we did over a happy hour last week. So that was really kind of him to spare his time. And then our next panelist was Clint Woods. He is the Chief Operating Officer at Pierpont Communications. And Pierpont is actually our diamond sponsor for IABC Houston. They've been very great supporting us. They are the largest independent communications agency within the state of Texas. They have clients all throughout the country. And so he has more than 20 years of experience within the crisis comm space. So we knew that he was a really valued expert as well. The next person that we had on our panel was Dr. Chris Yandel. He is based in Louisiana, and he's actually someone that I have a personal connection with. For many of you that are listening, you might not know that I used to work in college athletics. I used to work in sports, and Chris was my boss when I was at Baylor University. And he is, one of the greatest mind in college athletics. And he's known for his, strong digital savvy, his PR skills. And within the last few years, he's actually transitioned to K through 12 education and doing communications for that. And so I thought it'd be really important with so many of our members having, families at home. How can they navigate that? Working from home while also providing education. And, Chris has also done a really good job focusing on mental health. He's an author. He wrote a book on how to help, communicate with your kids and to build them up in the society. So I thought that it was a really well-rounded panel, and each person brought, immense knowledge that I really enjoyed personally moderating.
So how many, you don't have to say, but what was the attendance like?
Yeah, so that was kind of interesting because we had never used Zoom for online streaming before. And so we initially bought the license for 100 users for the webinar. And then actually on Wednesday, probably about 24 hours before we went live, I started to get really strong feedback, and people were emailing me asking if I knew about the webinar. And I was like, yeah, I'm actually hosting it. And it was people that I knew don't typically come to our events. They're not IABC members. They're just communicators within our community. So we ended up buying a license for up to 1,000 users. And I think it was pretty cool to be able to press go live. And I was expecting 30, 40, 50 people at most. And it immediately shot up to around, I think, 220 users online. And so that was really inspiring to see. And then, of course, we shared the webinar on our Facebook page and our YouTube channel, and we're going to re-release it as a podcast next week, which I think will provide some value as well. But to be able to see the support and, to have everyone basically watch the entire webinar live and to submit questions, it was kind of a cool feeling to know that we were providing value as an organization in a really, really critical time of need where people want answers. There's a lot of uncertainty, and what can they do as a community to rally together and help one another? And I thought that, if we could play a small part in that, then we were doing our jobs. And so I'm really proud of what our chapter was able to do at such a last minute notice.
And that's why you're International Chapter of the Year, by doing things like this. In all seriousness, and I'm serious about that, but in all seriousness, this is an interesting time for professional communicators. And I think the biggest lesson, or one of the greatest lessons, we work with other volunteer associations and other member associations and professional associations. And the adoption of Zoom has suddenly opened people's eyes to how you can get attendance without people being physically in a room. And there is the choice of putting it behind a paywall and doing a members only one, or doing fully public ones. And there's benefit for all in that sense. Style-wise, there's a piece of advice for someone who's considering running a Zoom meeting, or moderating, or presenting via a webcam. Do you have one tip for them? One thing that they could take away to have confidence when they start to do their first live?
Yeah, I think you should practice first and, get a group of people that you rely on. For us, we knew that we had no idea what we were doing going into it. I know how to host panel discussions. That's not difficult. But for me, having the webinar element, that was something that was new. And so we decided to have something fun. And for us, that was testing via a virtual happy hour. And we ended up having 15 people on. It was great just for us, for morale, to be able to come together and check in and see how everyone was doing, what they were struggling with. And honestly, Dan, I think you mentioned this just a moment ago about whether you should put it behind a paywall or make it free. And the Houston chapter, our focus right now is not about making money. We are a nonprofit organization. Our job is to serve the community in which we live and work. And I can't tell you how many people have reached out to me in the last week or two telling me that they've been laid off from their jobs, or that they can't find clients because so many of these industry powers in the energy space or healthcare aren't focusing on these other communications projects right now. And so we don't want to charge people for this kind of information. We want them to get value. We want to connect them. We want to show that we are a community. And in times of need, we need to rally together and just throw everything else out the window.
And I couldn't agree more.
I hope that answered your question.
It does, completely. One of the things I would always say to people, especially with a live scenario, if you're recording something, you've got the option to do it again and do pickups and retakes, etc. When you're doing a live, you can acknowledge that you've made a mistake and move on, and you'll have the sympathy generally of the audience. But doing a run through, having a practice, having a rehearsal, TV shows, you don't run a TV show in front of an audience or anything unless you have a rehearsal. And that's the mindset that you need to have. And so I celebrate that you've done that. You brought up a very important topic, that we are in this moment of this time of need. This is truly a global crisis. We need to be able to access resources, and there are some fantastic resources out there. I'm just going to say that on the IABC website at iabc.com, there are so many resources, and you can follow the link in the description of this episode to the COVID-19 resource page, which also includes a crisis response template, key messages template, how to continually build your crisis resilience, a checklist. Everyone knows I love colons. And there are a lot of great webinars that are happening at the international level as well. We've just had one from Jason Etter from Staffbase, which was 4 proven strategies to communicate in quarantine. We've got one coming up, which is how to adapt your internal communication strategy during a pandemic. That's coming from Simpler with Carolyn Clark and Jason Antoine. Looking forward to them very much. I'm very excited that you're going to be repurposing your webinar that you did into a podcast as well, to give people the option to listen whilst they're doing a secondary activity. Maybe they're with the kids and they want to zone out for a few minutes. I can understand that one. I love my children, I'll say that now. I want people to go and have access to all of these resources, but also at the same time, I, as the producer and host of the International Podcast, I listen to every single one of the IABC Houston ones as well. And I listen to other chapters. Edmonton's working on one as well. And out in the APAC region, there's another one out there. So I will say this, for great resources, look at what different chapters are doing as well. And as a great resource, the Business Communicators is one of my favorite professional communication podcasts out there. I said that I'm going to put links in, and I shall. Austin, if people wanted to get in touch with you and find out more about you, how could they do that?
Well, Dan, I really appreciate you for having me on the podcast. It's great to chat with you and to connect with you. And I thank you for all the kind words that you said. And I think a lot of that is just our chapter and just what we've done together. So I don't want people to think that it's just me doing things. It's our entire chapter coming around, sharing great ideas. And we have so many people that also help edit and do show notes for the podcast. But if you want to get in touch with me, you can just reach out to me on LinkedIn. My name's Austin Staton. Or you can follow me on Twitter at @astaton. If you don't like the sports that I post sometimes, just mute those. But if you have any comments, questions, or if you do want advice on how to launch a podcast, what kind of equipment you should get, and if Dan isn't available, and you can always come to me and pick my brain. And just keep in mind that be as creative as possible. Use what other chapters are doing. A lot of chapters throughout the country have great ideas, whether it's networking events, whether it's what they're doing online. Take those ideas and adapt them to your local chapter. You don't have to follow the same model to the exact T, but if you can still adapt it to what your chapter needs, I think you could really succeed and provide value for your members.
Austin Staton, thank you so much for joining us on this special edition of the IABC International Podcast.
Dan, thank you so much. I appreciate you for having me.